Hey everybody, it's Ben here, and today I want to show you how to save electricity and money with a kilowatt. So this little doohickey right here is called a kilowatt. It's by a company called P3. This particular one is model P4400. Basically, it's an energy meter. It allows you to track how much power over time any kind of an electrical appliance is using. I have with me today just a plain light bulb in a little treble lamp to show you how it works. I've also got an extension cord right here so we can get this plugged in right away. Now, the neat thing about the kilowatt is it is portable. You can plug it into any standard electric outlet. It's compatible with 50 and 60 hertz systems. Here in the United States, we use a 60 hertz system, and our electricity kind of comes in two flavors, 120 volt and 240 volt. This is for your typical 120 volt wall electric outlets. As to 240 volt power, we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. So if we come in close and take a look at it, I'll show you the features that are on here and how we can use those to save money. So to start with, I've got a 60 watt light bulb in this lamp, and we're just going to plug this in to the front of the kilowatt. And you can see our light comes on, and if I look at the meter here with it set to watts, it says 58.6 watts. So let's come in close, we'll take a look through here. So if we look here, we've got a couple of buttons across the face of this, volt, amp, watt, hertz, and kilowatt hour. I'll show you what each does. Volt, pretty straightforward. It's whatever the potential of your wall outlet is. Typically here in the United States, 120 volts nominal, although it's not always that. It varies a little depending on how far you live from your neighborhood transformer, or I've got solar on my house, so right now I'm actually pushing a little bit of power out to the grid, which does raise the voltage just a little bit. Amp tells you how many amps, how much current is being drawn through the device right now. So of course, because we have that lamp plugged in, we're using some power. Now I've got a 60 watt light bulb, and on a 120 volt system, that is approximately 1/2 amp, and you can see we're at 0.48. So half an amp of current is being drawn. If we go over to watt, we can see it's just a hair less than 60 watts. We call it a 60 watt light bulb, but that's not necessarily exactly how powerful it is. Another interesting thing here is if we hit the button again, we're instead going to this bottom unit, volt amps. That's basically watts, but a little bit different depending on if we're looking at real power or apparent power, which gets a little complicated. We're not really talking about that in this video, but it's kind of cool just that it's a feature on here. And of course that relates to the power factor. Now in something basic like a resistive light bulb, that power factor is going to be pretty much 1. Pressing this button again, going to hertz. We use a 60 hertz system here in the United States, and sure enough, our wall power is pretty darn close to 60. In fact, the power companies have to maintain that particular speed. That's even used for things like old-fashioned clocks, for example, actually run specifically off of that frequency. Now lastly, the big purple button on the right, this does kilowatt hours, and if we hit it again, it does just plain hours. The hours tells us how long it's been plugged in. In this case, I've had this plugged into the wall for 6 minutes. And at this point, if I show kilowatt hours, it's not going to show us very much because I only turned on this light just minutes ago. But what this does is it tracks power over time. So that's how we use the kilowatt. But how do we use it to save money? Well, when it comes down to it, it's really the fact that knowledge is power. Now we might know that a 60 watt light bulb uses 60 watts, but what about something like a refrigerator? We can look at the power tag that's on the fridge and know what the maximum amount of power it will use is, but we never know how long it's on for. A lamp might be easy. We might figure, oh, I use it 3 hours every evening. But with a fridge, it automatically cycles on and off. So we don't know what that total on time is, what that total amount of energy will be. Well, if you plug your refrigerator into the kilowatt, you can track how much energy it uses in total over time. So for an example of a refrigerator, you may actually want to plug the fridge into the kilowatt and leave it plugged in for a day or a week or some set amount of time. Now, you don't have to do it for an entire month. I mean, if you plug your fridge in for a day or two, just do the math, you can figure out how much it's going to use in a month. So another neat little tip for this is when you do plug something into this, make sure that the kilowatt is plugged into an extension cord first. Sometimes if this was plugged in like back behind a refrigerator, how would you get back there to see it? A little bit of a hassle. One thing I've also noticed is that the screen on here is not backlit, so if you're kind of in a dark little corner, you might actually need a flashlight to be able to see the screen, that sort of thing. It's much easier if you just put it on an extension cord, then you can pull it out, take a look at it wherever you need to. Now, the other thing is that the memory in here is volatile. So if you unplug it, it's going to forget that recorded kilowatt hour information. So again, that's another reason. Put it on an extension cord so you can easily look at it, get the information without having to unplug it from the wall. Now, just for one example of how we saved some money with a kilowatt was I was over at my parents' property where we have a couple of these neat little ponds with waterfalls. These were hand dug, just kind of a neat thing, makes the place feel cheerful having that running water. One of them is right off the dining room window, so it's really a cool thing to see a little waterfall right there. But that's using some pumps that pump the water from the pond up a short waterfall. And we had no idea how much power these pond pumps used, but frankly, the electric bill over there was really high. So what we did, set up a kilowatt with the pond pump going into the kilowatt, then an extension cord to the nearest electric outlet. And we were able to track how much power it used over time, and frankly, it was quite a bit. And then we decided, you know what? These ponds don't have to be pumping 24 hours per day. At 4 in the morning, nobody cares if there's a really cool little waterfall there or not. So what we did is we set them up on mechanical timers and still are able to enjoy the waterfalls, the sound of the moving water during the day and at dinner time, that sort of a thing. But it saves that energy by not running them at night. Now, of course, the mechanical timers themselves use a tiny amount of energy, but very little compared to those pond pumps. So we ended up saving about $50 per month on the electric bill over there. Now, there are a couple of limitations on the kilowatt. The main one is it's designed for 120 volts, 15 amps. So it's not going to do 240 volt power for you, and it's not going to do something like 30 amps, for example. So you're not going to be able to plug in a 240 volt device into it or a high current device like an electric dryer, for example. Now, there are some ways around that. Actually, right behind me here, I've got a panel meter back here, which is designed for 240 volts. That's also maybe around $20 for that panel meter, and I have it rigged up to read the power that my electric car charging system uses. Alexa, turn on electric car charging.
Okay.
So besides the kilowatt, there's other ways of measuring power. This is a very inexpensive panel meter that I bought off Amazon. This one's designed to work at 240 volts, and right now it's measuring the 3,000 watts or so that I'm using to charge my electric car. It tells you power, current, and it also tracks the energy over time in kilowatt hours. Now, here's a big caveat for you folks driving something like a Chevy Volt, for example. I do know a number of Chevy Volt drivers that they plug in and they recharge just using 120 volts AC. Don't plug anything into this that draws a fairly high amount of current continuously over a long time, like plugging in an electric car on 120 volts. I have seen these melt before. They're great little devices, but don't put a lot of current through them. If you're charging at 12 amps continuously overnight, that might not be so good for this. So that panel meter that I have back here, it works fantastic for 240 volt devices, including electric car charging. I have this one set up so that I can compare my electric car charging use versus my electric bill in general, so I can see how much electricity I'm using for my house and my garage versus specifically for my car. Another nice feature on that panel meter is it is resettable. It's got kind of a trip odometer mode and a little button. I can reset that, do that once a month so that it continues to track my electrical use. I write it down, and then once a month I reset it. Now, another great way to track power on the 240 volt side is actually just to use an old school utility meter. These were analog. They've got that great big dial on there. When I was a kid and that was spinning too fast, that's when my dad would yell at us to, hey, turn off all the lights, make sure we start saving some energy. Because they work like an odometer, they never forget the number. The number just keeps going up, which is why I just marked down that number on a piece of paper next to my utility meter. This one you're seeing right now, I have rigged up to my electric micro boiler for heating my garage. And again, that way I can track how much power just the heating system uses versus the rest of my electrical usage in my home. Now, lastly, if you want to be able to track 240 volt power for, say, your entire house, there are some great household power monitoring systems. The Kilowatt works fantastic for one circuit, one outlet, one appliance. But if you want to be able to see what your entire house is doing, there's some great systems. T.E.D, the energy detective, is one that's been around for a long time. There's a lot of great newer systems out there. Some of them get very expensive, but also give you a lot of control. So take a look in the links and we'll have a couple for you to explore down there. The Kilowatt is a great tool to figure out how much power you're using for individual appliances, especially something like I sometimes see people will have an old refrigerator or a chest freezer in their garage. But keep in mind, older appliances often use a lot more power than the newer ones do. So get yourself a Kilowatt. They're inexpensive. Typically, they're around 20 bucks or so. Very much worth just buying one, use it to track those appliances. Sometimes they're even available to borrow from a public library, so there's another option for you as well. Another great use for a Kilowatt is to help you track down phantom loads, or sometimes called vampire loads. There's a lot of devices that use energy just when they're plugged in, not even when they're on. A lot of times things like audio-video components, or basically anything with a remote control. Because to receive the signal from the remote, it really needs to have some sort of circuitry always on, ready, and waiting for that signal. So televisions, VCRs, DVD players, satellite dish receivers, anything like that often will use as much electricity just being plugged in and on the off mode as when it's actually on. So one way to save power with these things, plug them all into a power strip. The same company that makes the Kilowatt actually makes a smart power strip, which is also a really cool tool to have. And a lot of the newer AV components, it used to be that, you know, if you unplugged your VCR, it would reset the clock. The newer things are much, much better that way. A lot of them have very small, like an internal watch battery, for example. So even if you turn off power, don't worry about it. It's still good. The Kilowatt's a great tool. I highly recommend you get yourself one. It's not perfect. It doesn't do high current, it doesn't do 240 volts, but there's some other fantastic tools out there for that sort of thing. But if you use it, you can figure out how much electricity you use, and then you can figure out how to save money on your electric bill. Until next time, stay charged up. We hope you liked this video. If you did, please comment, share, like, and subscribe. Come on over and check out the blog at 300mpg.org. We're also now on Patreon and would love your support there. We'll see you next time.